Welcome to our talk on lunar pits and lava tubes for a modern ark. I would like to acknowledge my co-authors, Alvaro Diaz-Flores, Claire Pedersen, Yinan Zhu, Lindsay Williams, and Professor Cholik Chan. And we are presenting from the Space and Terrestrial Robotics Exploration Laboratory and the Asteroids Laboratory at the Aerospace and Mechanical Engineering Department at the University of Arizona. In this presentation, we will first start with our introduction, followed by motivations, objective for this work, and then we'll be reviewing some of our lunar lava tube exploration work, followed by a presentation of the lunar ark concept, feasibility summary, and preliminary conclusions. So as an introduction, there are many living organisms that are seriously endangered. Our diverse ecosystem is in danger on every major continent, as you can see from here. Large fractions of every kinds of plants and animals are endangered. And due to human activity and other factors that we fully don't understand, there's been rapid losses over the last few decades. In particular, when we lose an apex predator, this cascades down to an entire food chain. In fact, as you can see here, for example, a shark being an apex predator, when we lose a shark, what we're ending up losing is the entire diversity of the ecosystem. And so some of the animals may remain even after the death of an apex predator, but it may not be as diverse. And so this can have devastating implications to animal and plant diversity. And this has been accelerating over the past few decades. Furthermore, there's been threat of collapse to the world's food supply, particularly due to a combination of factors killing critical organisms such as honeybees, which are holding up the world's human food supply. In particular, things like pesticides, artificial chemicals, predators, diseases, and changes in climate all can impact honeybees, which in turn impacts pollination and thus result in mass loss of crops. What we've seen over the last 20 years or so, actually the last 30 years, has been a rapid drop in honeybee population. It has recovered a bit since 2009, but it has never really quite recovered to its original state. The other factors is that there's just mass extinction going on in the last decades. And there are many important threats to sort of note, including supervolcanic eruptions, global nuclear war, asteroid impact, global epidemics, climate change accelerated, global solar storms, and global droughts. Earth, as you can see here, is in a fragile state, and humans have already faced one close call nearly 75,000 years ago, and that was a supervolcanic eruption. And so the Toba supervolcano, which erupted about 74 to 75,000 years ago, resulted in prolonged winter for decades or more, and resulted in the start of a 1,000-year cooling cycle. It aligns well with an estimated drop in human population and diversity at that time. And so, given all of these major cataclysms, what we feel is that there's a need for a modern ark, which could be more cost-effective than trying to protect all the endangered species that are in trouble, just because there are so many. It's more cost-effective than creating an entire artificial ecosystem to keep them alive. In addition, we can still save them till the technology advances to then reintroduce these species. In other words, save them for another day. And this could be a modern global insurance policy. And this concept has been already started with the Salvabard Seed Vault, also known as the Doomsday Seed Vault, where all the major seeds for the world's food supply has been stored at this location. And that happens to be an inspiration for our modern ark. And so why? Humanity has a fundamental responsibility to protect the diversity of life on Earth. Salvabad Doomsday Seed Bank is one step in that right direction, but it too is in a dangerous state. It is in the Arctic Circle, very much near the Arctic Ocean, and with the rising sea levels, even the Salvabad Seed Bank could be inundated with the ocean. With the expected rise in oceans all around the world due to climate change, here's a vision of New York City underwater. Chances are the seed bank would also become inaccessible. And thus we need a modern ark that is safe and away from all the possible Earth's cataclysms. For this reason, we want to develop a secure modern ark that can house all the endangered species of the Earth and avoid any earthly cataclysm. And so we wanted to explore the potential for lunar lava tubes and caves to fit this potential need. And we want to look at and perform preliminary concept development and determine energy and power feasibility for this concept. So first, we want to just give you a background about lunar pits and lava tubes. These were recently discovered in about 2013, and a little bit before that by one of the Japanese missions. And then nearly 200 were discovered by Wagner and Robinson using LROC images. And these lunar pits are likely entrances to lava tubes, which have been there for maybe 3 to 4 billion years. These pits go deep underground, up to about 80 to 100 meters underground. And they provide ready-made shelter from the surface of the moon that undergoes major temperature swings. And thus the temperature is quite constant in these lava tubes. And so it's great shelter from these temperature swings on the surface. It's a great shelter from solar and cosmic radiation and micro-meteorites. And so the question is, how pristinely preserved are these lava tubes? And we would like to know inside, what are the flow features, what are sublimate minerals inside, and what kind of regolith, and if there is even potentially water. And so why a lunar ark? Because it's only 4 days away from Earth. The moon's subsurface is sheltered and frozen in time for at least 3 billion years. And the moon likely doesn't have enough water resources to become a thriving center on its own. And so what we're arguing is that humans are not going to be eager to live and work subsurface on the moon. And so there are potential better applications for setting up a subsurface base. And so there have been thoughts about a lunar base underground. A few concepts have explored underground lunar bases, but we would argue it's more likely a temporary shelter. And humans are unlikely to prefer them as they're not ground moles and are quite claustrophobic living underground, particularly without windows to the outside. So one of our concepts for exploring the lunar pits and lava tubes is the SphereX robot. And these robots are spherical in shape, as you can see here, and they contain in them a propulsion system to hop and fly, in addition to a state-of-the-art navigation system consisting of stereo cameras and LiDAR, in addition to onboard computing, a CNDH, in other words, power management, using fuel cells, and radio antennas for communication. So you see here this overall concept of our SphereX robot. The SphereX robot would be deployed from a mission, a lander that would launch and land next to one of these pits, maybe several hundred meters, or be launched from a rover that approaches one of these pits and is deployed into the pit area. The spherical robots, one by one, hop into the pit and fly and take pictures, and they form a bucket brigade to then pass the information that they've gained, any pictures, any data that they've gained, back to the lander. So as we can see here, there have been a whole variety of lunar pits discovered, and they could be ready-made shelters, and they could be in pretty much pristine conditions. And so here are a few of them: Mare Tranquillatus, Marius Hills, and Mare Engini. One of the things we would do with our robots before determining which pit to deploy as Lunar Ark would be to do a thorough survey of the pits. And that would include surveying the outside. And so these robots could do a bunch of hops, as you can see, hop 1, 2, 3, and 4, combine their LiDAR images to then get you a more detailed and higher density LiDAR images. And we're in the lookout to look for danger signs from rough and rugged rocks. In addition, the robots would need to then launch themselves from the entrance of the pit and land at the bottom of the pit to then get into the lava tube and be able to do further exploration, particularly looking for collapsed ceiling and the extent of debris. And so we've looked into methods for communicating with these robots as they get into the pit, using either RF methods or radio frequency methods and lasers. And for that, we've looked into use of line of sight analysis. And in addition, we've looked into placement of sensors at regular intervals along the lava tube so as to provide lighting, so as to provide radio frequency modulation and retransmission, in addition to setting up all sorts of other services that may be needed inside the lava tube. And so we've also had these robots go in there to map and perform deep, detailed scanning and mapping. And these maps can then be combined together to get even higher density maps, a master map, as you see here. We need all these master maps in place for us to then build a Lunar Ark. And so what will be saved in the Ark? We would house around 6.7 million species, of which 5.1 million species are fungi, 0.3 million plants, and 1.3 million species of animals. These, what will be stored will include seeds, sperms, eggs, and DNA, and they could be stored at cryo conditions below minus 180 degrees centigrade, and it's expected to survive for hundreds of years. So here's our concept of a Lunar Ark. The Ark would be embedded within a lava tube and consist of a series of cryopreservation modules where the actual seeds and eggs will be stored. And these modules each will be 10 meters in size and be interconnected and be running along the lava tube. In addition, we'll have preservation and analysis laboratories that will periodically take samples of the cryopreserved seeds and eggs and test them out to look for integrity and problems. In addition, to get access to the entire base, we would have a series of elevator shafts that would be fitted into the pit. And you would have an airlock system to enter into the pit from the surface of the moon. The base would be powered using solar photovoltaics, where the power supply would be all located on the surface. In addition, we would have a K-band communication antenna system that would be directly connected to Earth. The lunar regolith would be protecting the base from radiation, from temperature swings, in addition to micro-meteorites. The modules themselves would be prefabricated and transported from Earth, be envisioning using SpaceX Falcon Heavy or SLS to do the heavy lifting. And so here's the base. Again, in this extended version shows many more cryopreservation modules aligned side by side. It shows how we can further construct the base and then expand it over time. And so we have elevator shafts for transporting cryopreserved material, in addition to a goods elevator shaft along end of the lunar pit to bring in more cryopreservation modules and expand the base. Inside each cryo module, these modules would be operating at minus 180 degrees centigrade or minus 196 degrees centigrade. And so inside you'll have these circular shelves that would contain cassettes holding the preserved DNA eggs or sperm. And we would have a series of 7 degree of freedom robot manipulators on a mobile system to go out and retrieve these cassettes or store them back at their designated location. The entire cross-section contains multiple layers, consisting of inflatable bladders, pressure garments, nylon ripstop, along with a solid rigid aluminum backing. As the module inside needs to be either minus 180 degrees or minus 196 degrees, the outside, inside the lava tube, would have a temperature of only minus 25. And so for this reason, these modules need to be refrigerated. And so we will next look at what are the energy requirements for refrigeration. Before that, considering that the insides of the module will be at cryo conditions, we need robotics to be able to operate under these very cold conditions. And we expect to use materials such as yttrium, barium, copper under neodymium magnet to perform quantum levitation. By doing this, we can have our robots literally levitate over the surface of the module and not be in contact with the ground. And so this allows us, and how this is possible is due to this principle in quantum levitation, where we take a magnetic flux, and at superconducting temperatures, it results in these quantum flux fields being locked in place. And so this ends up enabling us to hold together objects much like having two magnets in repulsion, but with a lot more stability. And so this whole quantum levitation principle can actually enable us to do a lot of things with robotics. We can avoid having to directly touch and handle substances at cryogenic conditions because it's so challenging. Under the wrong circumstances, it could lead to cold welding if it's in a vacuum, or freezing and jamming under pressure. In addition to the other factors are, with this quantum levitation, as we said, it could be a solution. So it can minimize metal-to-metal contact. It can avoid the need for wheels to ground contact. In addition, it's going to minimize contamination when handling these preserved cassettes. And so our thermal system is modeled as follows. This is a cross-section of the cryo module, as you see here. In one of these considerations, we believe the temperature inside is going to be minus 180 degrees centigrade, and the outside temperature is going to be minus 25. And so we model this with a series of chambers, one inside another, and we come up with these equivalent circuits of the thermal system. This is the original circuit, as you see here, and this is the simplified circuit below. From the simplified circuit, then we figure out what are the refrigeration needs for the system, and it ends up that to hold these modules at minus 180 degrees centigrade, we need to provide about 2.3 kilowatts of power, and to hold it at minus 196, we need about 3.8 kilowatts of power. Both of these power numbers include sufficient margins to account for individual losses of the refrigeration system. So overall, as we've talked about, for the amount of material that we need to preserve, we feel we'll only need 5 cryo modules. And these modules would be each requiring between 2.3 kilowatts and 3.8 kilowatts, which comes to a total of 23 kilowatts for the 5 modules. More work really needs to be done to figure out if the 5 cryo modules is really enough for the base. Next, of course, we're going to take the power generated, and we have to really figure out how we're going to power the system. And so our first option that we're considering most seriously is use of photovoltaics that would be located on the surface of the moon and be operating over a lunar day. It would generate enough power for powering or refrigerating the base over an entire lunar day and lunar night nonstop. And so the Ark needs about 11,000 kilowatt hours for a lunar day, and the total needs end up being about 28,500 kilowatt hours. This includes margins. So based on these needs, we figured out that the system would have to have about 191 square meters of triple junction cells operating at 30% efficiency. So given this, our thermal requirements, our power requirements, and an overall initial concept of this lunar Ark, we would want to store about 6.7 million endangered species. The material needs to be preserved at cryo conditions. It is quite extremely challenging to operate at those cold temperatures, and we need to see some extensive advancement in cryo-robotics to make this possible, particularly to exploit quantum locking and levitation to enable robotics to operate under those conditions. Furthermore, we also need to see if the seeds can withstand the weightlessness of the lunar environment after it's frozen, first at Earth. And then we further also want to see, of course, what are needed to deal with loss of power, interruptions, various other interruptions that we may face on the surface of the moon. With that said, thank you, and I'd be happy to take your questions.